everyone. My name is Ryann Nieves. I am UCLA's e-discovery and administrative litigation coordinator. I work in insurance and risk management. My whole job function is to basically preserve documents and data for litigation or when the university is anticipating litigation. So that's kind of what we'll talk about today. Here's a brief overview. We'll kind of touch on what is e-discovery, what is the legal preservation request, the overview, who it applies to, and how to implement a preservation request. So as you all know, many years ago, I don't know how many moons ago, but this is how we did business. It was mostly paper files, and in litigation we used to go into the file rooms and file cabinets and roll out tons of boxes and gave it to the lawyers to look at. And today this is what we got. Everything is electronic, right? We got laptops, smartphones, data is everywhere, and this is kind of what the lawyers are facing is data is everywhere. How do we get our hands on it because it's relevant to litigation or potential litigation? So what is e-discovery? E-discovery is the exchange of information in electronic format. So this is important to the lawyers. As you know, it contains metadata, the headers, in the emails or the files and all of that kind of thing. So it's known as electronically stored information. These are several examples of that. A couple of my challenges are email archives. They could be local PSTs. They could be in a cloud-based service. People can store them on their thumb drives. I mean, really just anywhere, right? So most users will see their email in their Outlook or their whatever email client they're using. But then documents in the cloud. That's, the university is moving to Office 365, Google Apps, that kind of a thing. So dealing with preservation with, data in the cloud, that's a pretty big thing these days. So when the university is required to do a preservation request, these are some of the things that we go through. We identify when the duty to preserve arises. It's not any time there's a complaint or an issue with the university. There's a certain threshold. We conduct a brief inquiry to determine who are the key people involved. So it's not going to be every single person who has data or who may have had an email or a correspondence regarding whatever is that issue. It's only those people who are principally involved. And we're going to provide them with a written notice, the formal letter. I write the letter. It's memorialized in writing. It kind of outlines the scope of what's to be preserved, so it'll kind of discuss the matter, what's relevant, if there's date ranges that go back, how far we have to go back. We will decide what needs to be retained. We will collect and retain that data. We don't always collect. So this is we'll kind of get into this later, but collection can be dependent on various circumstances. And then we'll always maintain written records of what we're doing. So as I said, when does the duty to preserve arise? So this is triggered when either the university is in actual litigation. So the university has been sued with a lawsuit naming the university or employees of the university, or it's when we're reasonably anticipating a lawsuit. So oftentimes that comes about when somebody files a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission saying they were discriminated or harassed, maybe it's age, sex, gender, that sort of thing. It could be with our state agency, the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, or the Office of Civil Rights. Other times, it could be the person has lawyered up. They have an attorney, and they have written a letter to the university saying, hey, this is my client. These are our complaints and grievances. You're on notice that we are thinking of suing you. We want to work it out. This is our demand. Maybe it's $1 million. It could be a variety of things. And we're on notice at that point that we're anticipating litigation, so we need to put our preservation process in effect. Sometimes, right here, specific and repeated inquiries and complaints, those are kind of our frequent flyers. People who are constantly filing complaints with HR, right? They have multiple complaints. It could be workers' comp folks have repeated workers' comp injuries. Maybe they also have associated discrimination complaints. Maybe it's disability related, something along those lines. Sometimes, for example, press or industry interest. For example, the flood that happened at the end of July, right? So that's kind of, not just local, but, statewide news, right, that UCLA had this huge flood. And so for that reason, we have implemented our preservation procedures. And then, of course, the absolute last time we're on notice is when the actual lawsuit is filed. And sometimes when that happens, we actually have no idea that there's been an issue with the employee or with somebody who's been visiting our campus, or maybe it's a contractor or something like that. Sometimes just out of the blue, they serve us with a lawsuit. We're like, oh, did anybody know this was going on or whatever? So sometimes that happens too. So what is a preservation request? So this is something that's legally required by state and federal law. This actually started back in 2007, 2008, because all of this electronic data, this is how people correspond via email, electronic documents, and a lot of times the lawyers are saying, oh, I'm sorry, my client, left the company, their email accounts are gone, things like that. And they were like, whoa, so you got rid of data and you knew that you were being sued, or you actually have a lawsuit and you're getting rid of this stuff? So state and federal courts decided to memorialize this stuff in writing, that anytime you have a lawsuit or you're reasonably anticipating a lawsuit, that you have to take steps to preserve electronic data. So basically, don't pull an electronic Enron and hit the delete button, right? So that's kind of what we're talking about here. Like I said earlier, I'll send it to you to the custodians and other folks in a formal letter. It's known at the top as a notice of duty to preserve evidence, and it talks about all types of documents in ESI. So most people tend to think I'm only referring to emails, and that's actually not true. I'm actually talking about hard copies if they have hard copies, other electronic documents, Word files, Excel. It can even be voice recordings, text messages, things like that we talked about on that other slide. But most of the time, what is relevant is email. That's why most people tend to focus on the email portion. So who's involved? So we've anticipated litigation, or we're in actual litigation. Campus counsel here at UCLA lets me know. They say, hey, Ryan, we have to implement our preservation procedures. These are the people that's involved, or the only information I have is in the complaint. We need to do some more digging. So then I'll send a preservation letter to the initial people that I know of. I'll kind of have conversations with them to find out what is this really about, who else is involved, and I'll kind of get some more names. Then that would be the custodian and end user. And I use these terms interchangeably. So after that, a preservation letter also goes to the local IT for the department. So sometimes the person will have multiple appointments. For example, like a dean, right? They will have their faculty appointment in their department, and then they'll also have an appointment in the dean's office, right? So sometimes both of those local IT people would get a preservation letter. Sometimes it's the case where I know that their data is not on, say, their faculty appointment server at all, that they do all of their business in the dean's office for their classes and everything. A preservation letter is also sent to the campus email administrator, and that's, as you all know, enterprise messaging or MedNet, but there are times where the local department hosts their own email. So then it would only be one letter that they would get, and it would cover email as well as, documents on the local server and things like that. So these are the folks that are involved. The most important thing in a preservation request is that time is of the essence. As you guys know, data gets deleted fast. Some people are good about spring cleaning their email boxes. Some people do it every day. There could be a pending, somebody could have left, and there's a pending request to delete that account, maybe wipe their desktop, reissue it out. So typically when I send the preservation notices to local IT and to the email folks, is I usually ask for a response within 3 days, that we start working on it within 3 days. Typically in my letters, I identify who I think that person is responsible for, so they kind of have notice right away. Sometimes if I can't get the letter out soon enough, and there's a variety of reasons why that is, it could be because I don't have the scope finalized yet. variety of issues like that. And so I'll give a verbal call and I'll say, hey, Harold, these are the 5 people that are involved in this case. I don't know if any of them, are leaving or if there's any issues, but I just wanted to give you a heads up. You'll receive a letter in about a week. Just wanted to let you know now. So if you are a lucky IT person and you've received this preservation letter, do you have to comply? Yes, you absolutely do have to comply. Like I said earlier, it's legally required. It's not an option. I know that we all have a lot of job duties and things. This is just in addition to that. So whatever I can do to make it easier for you, let me know. It's a collaboration. I know you guys got other things to do, but we have to do it anyway. And that's just a little funny right there. So you received the preservation letter. Now what are we going to do? So as I talked about earlier, if your person is on enterprise messaging or MedNet, it's going to get a letter. Ian's going to get a letter. They're going to say, okay, hey, Ryan, we've received your letter. We're going to go ahead and comply, meaning they're going to agree with, in writing to me, that they've gotten the notice, that people that are listed in the notice, they do in fact support. And it's a legal requirement. I have to have compliance in writing. And the reason why that is say in a year from now something were to happen and we're dealing with the other side and I have to go to court, they're going to say, well, did you notify them? Yeah, I notified them. Did they acknowledge the notification? What did they do? So all of that stuff, has to be done in writing. It just helps support the case and the process. Enterprise messaging and EM, they're going to create preservation folders in the users I've identified in the letter. They're going to go ahead and add them to the backup scope. They're going to push folders through. They're going to notify the end user of the location of the folder and when the folders will be created. They will also mark the account to prevent deletion. So that way, if a couple of years from now they get a deletion request, they can see that this person is still part of an ongoing preservation. This is really important actually because legal cases tend to go on 5-6 years, on average a couple, but I really honestly don't know. Each case kind of has its own life, so marking the account is really important. And they're also going to document what they've done. And here's a folder example of what the preservation folders are going to look like. So in EM, they're going to have a top folder called Preserved Evidence with the name of the case with 2 subfolders. The privileged folder, that's stuff for attorney-client communication. So anything between them and any of UCLA's attorneys or attorneys we've hired, stuff between me and them, even between yourselves and them, because you're setting up the preservation process, you're doing it on my request, and that request is up at behalf of campus counsel. So that's the privileged folder. Most things are going to go into people's first folder. It's just their general stuff on the matter. If you're on MedNet, you're going to get something that's called managed folders, and it's going to have the same subfolders. Now, if you're on Office 365, there's a slightly different process for this. The folder structure is going to be the same, but actually we have to add an on-premises mailbox. So with 365, we can't push the folders through. This is where I need local IT's help in terms of configuring the account to the local profile, and then the end user will be able to see the folders in their account. Yeah.
Have you actually tested that?
We have.
Do you know if that shows up on Outlook Web?
That I don't know. Oh yeah, let me repeat the question. So the question was, have we tested the Office 365 folder creation, and do those folders show up on the web-based version when accessing 365? And so my answer is I don't know. We just started doing this in the last month, so I haven't actually been to any of the custodians' desks to actually see what it looks like. But my guess would be the answer would probably be no, because it's an on-premises account. So it's separate and apart from the 365. So technically they're going to have 2 accounts, right? They're going to have a 365 account, and then they're going to have a second account that's hosted locally. So I don't think it would show up in the 365.
Hybrid approach, right?
Yeah, I don't think it would show up on NWA.
I don't think
Yeah, I don't think
it's multiple accounts. It's one account. Depending on the client that knows how to access it,
That's a good question.
No, I think
It's really
actually
two
separate
different. It's
accounts.
really two separate accounts.
Yeah. Once you go to the cloud,
Well, you get the
you have to
cloud.
call. You have to call Nieves and say, hey, I need an account created for Harold because we create these reservation folders. At that point, you will log in. It could be the same account name and password, but I think there's just
Actually, so the discussion for those at your computers is it the same account name and password? And actually, it's not. It's a whole. You're going to see something that's called ZZ underscore last name first name. You'll still see it in your Outlook pane once you configure it, but it's really a whole separate account. And so if you're using the local email client or Macmail or something like that, you will see it at the bottom of the folder structure where you can drag and drop from 365 into the on-premises account. But if you are logged on to 365 directly away from the office, you're not going to see the on-prem account. And if I'm wrong about that, I will let you know, but that's my understanding. We're just rolling it out now.
Well, this will definitely require local IT
Yeah.
intervention. So.
Absolutely. So Harold was saying that this requires local IT intervention with 365, and that's absolutely true. The nice thing about our previous method and still current method is that enterprise messaging would get the names of the custodians, they would create the folders would be pushed automatically. But with 365, because we have to have the profile added, it does require more assistance with local IT. So before, local IT would primarily handle the electronic document stuff, right? So the stuff on the server, laptop, desktop. But now with the 365 edition, there's an additional step that needs to take place. So my apologies for not having more details. We are literally in the first case of doing this right now. So we're working it out as we go along.
Can you go over once again where you want, what should go in preservation of evidence, what should go in Joe Green preservation, and what should go in Joe Green?
Sure. So the question is, what goes in the folder examples, what goes in the preserved evidence folder, what goes in Joe Bruin preservation and Joe Bruin preservation privileged. The top folder, either if it's preserved evidence or managed folders, is just a top folder. Nothing goes in there. The custodian's documents are going to go into either the preservation or the preservation-privileged folder. So, and the reason why you see that top preserved evidence folder is a lot of my HR people have multiple cases, so they will see all of their cases listed. So Joe Bruin privileged, Josephine preservation, Josephine privileged, things like that, and they'll see all 10 of them. So, and the same thing is true for the net side of the house.
The difference between the preservation and the preservation-privilege?
Sure. So what's the difference between the two folders, the preservation and the preservation-privilege? So all general emails and correspondence that the end user has is going to go into the first folder. Anything that is attorney-client privilege. So, for example, they were emailing with campus counsel. They were seeking legal advice about the matter or how to proceed. Maybe now, in the past, a couple of years ago, how to handle the situation. All of those types of communications are considered attorney-client privilege, and they go into the privilege folder. At the end of the day, what's most important is that the end user gets their emails into one of the two folders because those folders are backed up on a separate backup scope. So if we ever have to produce anything, the lawyers are going to go through it anyway. It's more of like an initial cut. And the good thing about the privilege folder, too, is that on a going forward basis, okay, yeah, now we're, either in litigation or I know who the lawyers are involved, and when they get those sorts of communications, they can easily drag and drop them. So it's not exact, it's just meant to be helpful in sorting it out. All right. Any other questions on that?
Just a quick question just on email in general and what preserved. Do you, suppose someone is using their personal email on a work computer, is that email, say their Google Docs email, it's part of the case, is that something that you have access to, or is that something that has to be subpoenaed?
good question. So the question is, what if the person who's subject to a preservation request has emails and documents in their personal email account or on their, say, their personal computer or something like that? Is that right? Right. So then, yes, if any of those accounts contain university business, they are subject to preservation. So it can be handled in a variety of ways, and this is typically where I need local IT's assistance, is coming up with a plan on how we're going to get access to those messages, and also working with the custodian, because I need their permission to do it. So typically, when I get a preservation letter and I'm sending that, I have calls with local IT and say, hey, these are the folks, let's talk about it. I also have calls with the custodian, and if they notify me that they have this personal account that contains data, I say, you know, we need to go back and talk to your local IT person and figure out, are we going to configure a local email client for the purposes of moving those things into your work email, or are we going to export them out and then save a copy locally, maybe on the server in your electronic documents folder? We'll have to figure that out. It does happen, especially for faculty. Faculty is big on that part. Any other questions? Yeah.
Pam, I was happening with at UCLA.edu email as a number of faculty use that as a primary one for business.
So with the question is, what happens with the @ucla.edu account? So for Bruin Online, typically I will send a letter to Bruin Online, and they will snapshot the account, because Bruin Online is kind of not really on our server. It kind of is. Depends on how the custodian has it configured, right? So we will snapshot the account, and then I will also work with local IT and the custodian to make sure they have folders set up. Now, obviously, these folders are not going to be backed up like they are on EM or MedNet, because we just can't do it. Just technical reasons, we can't do it. But we have a snapshot, and then we have a place to where they can segregate their data. Some of the departments will actually set up those folders and then do an export out of those folders and keep that. So it really just depends on a case-by-case basis. And sometimes they'll have multiple accounts, like you were saying earlier about the personal account. Sometimes it's BOL, and sometimes it's their EM account. So all of those, if it contains university business that's relevant to the matter, then that's what we have to do. All right. So I think we went over this, the local IT duties, obviously acknowledging receipt, reviewing and confirming the names listed in the letter. We kind of talked about that earlier, especially with dual appointments and things like that. Or if somebody's transferred departments, you know, you can let me know, hey, you know, this person's no longer in my department. And then I would say, well, is the matter about when they were in your department, or is the matter relevant to their new department? So it's things like that. So that's why there's constant communication between me, the end user, and then yourself as local IT. You're going to create a folder on their, I prefer their home directory, where they can store any electronic data and documents into that folder. Some departments choose to create a preservation folder area that only certain people have rights to, where they can store their documents in. It's really on a, you know, I'm okay with either approach. It's whatever makes sense for the department. Just let me know, so that way I have an understanding of what's being done. Back up the folders. And then overall, local IT is just responsible for providing technical assistance. So for example, EM is taking care of the email preservation folder part. You're taking care of the local docs, right? But if they need help with searching, how do I do a search? Some people don't know how to do a search. You know, kind of showing, okay, here's the search tool, that kind of thing. So that's really what I need your assistance for. And then documenting in case you need to testify. As you can see, I have, in each one of these, I have acknowledging receipt and compliance and document. And that's just important in case the unforeseen happens, something we just had no idea, or we can go back and say, this is our process, this is what we did, we followed it, I have it in writing, I notified people, Ryan notified me, and then we can produce those if we need to. And then I talked about this earlier, if you're a department that hosts your own email, then you're also responsible for the email portion, creating folders in the email, backing up those folders, things like that. The custodian is primarily responsible for searching, segregating, and identifying the relevant documents. So all of you, if you've provided the location, you have backup in place. It's their job at the end of the day to make sure they're in compliance, to make sure they've read the preservation list, to make sure they know what needs to be preserved and that they're putting it in the proper location. And then my job is basically to make sure, to notify everyone, to make sure everyone understands what's required, troubleshoot if there's any unusual circumstances that need to be taken care of. For example, personal accounts, or it could be, I had one case where 2 field laptops were an issue. And so, in the data that was on those laptops, we actually had to forensically image the laptop, keep those, and then reissue the laptops back out in circulation. So sometimes there's weird things like that that come up. So that's my job, is to kind of work with everyone just to make sure everyone's in compliance and taking into account those special circumstances. And then ultimately, my job is to serve as a liaison between yourself, with the custodian, with campus counselor, or any of the attorneys. I also send out reminders saying, hey, this matter is still ongoing. Like I said, they last for quite a few years. So 90-day reminders seem to be a good thing to do. The good thing about the 90-day reminders, it's a good time to verify your backup. Make sure your backup is in place. Make sure no email accounts have suddenly gone missing that shouldn't have gone missing, if they're on the preservation list, that sort of thing. If you don't want to do it every 90 days, that's okay. It's just a recommendation. A good time to remind yourself, oh yeah, let me just dot my I's and cross my T's on that. And as I said earlier, documenting, it's a good idea if for you as local IT to create your own preservation log and file. And the reason that is that there's multiple cases sometimes. One department can have 10, 15 cases. I think one of my departments over in the Chancellor's office has numerous cases and a couple of hundred people who are subject to preservation. So it's just a good way to keep yourself organized and kind of know, and just kind of realizing that we're in this for the long haul potentially. Separated employees, these folks can be tricky. So dealing with, are they separated when we receive the preservation letter, or do they become separated afterwards? So if they became separated after they received a preservation letter, the preservation should stay in place and continue. So in other words, EM, if they were to receive a disable request, they wouldn't actually delete the account. They may disable and hide the account, but they're not going to delete the account because the person is still on the preservation list. The same thing would be true for local desktop files and the preservation folders that you created locally for them. If they are a transfer employee, the same thing would apply for separated employees, making sure we have all of that in place and the preservation is ongoing. If it's a situation where the person has separated and we now received a preservation request, they separated 6 months ago and now we have a preservation request, my obligation is just to do my due diligence. Do we still have that email account? Do we still have their desktop? Do we, any of their files are still laying around? If we have those, then we need to go ahead and scoop them up, preserve them. They wouldn't receive notice of that. It was just something we would do internally because it's our data now. So, and if it's not there, then that's okay too. And then wrapping up here, so we went over this. Key points to remember is that ESI is regularly and routinely available. We're not talking about backup tapes, things like that. If it's backup tapes, as you guys know, it's for disaster recovery purposes. That's what it's for. It's not like, oh, you know what, Ryan, I deleted those emails a year ago. I need them for the preservation course. If they deleted them a year ago, then that's okay. That's their normal course of business. It's from the date of the preservation letter going forward that they shouldn't delete anything regarding that matter. And then I think, let's see, lessons learned. So I'm a big fantasy football player, and I'm in playoffs this week, so that's why I put that up there. But so hopefully, I get some good juju going into my playoffs this weekend. But I had one instance where I asked a department to image somebody's desktop. And I asked the department person if they knew how to do it, if they had all the tools, and they did. They said, yes, absolutely. And then 9 months later, I needed the image. And I sent it to a vendor, and the vendor informed me, no, this was actually a copy and not an image. And so at that point, my heart sank, and I was like, please let me know that I put this in writing, that I said image, and that we understood the same thing. And if I came back to that person and they had some technical issues and they just didn't tell me. And they felt like they just should go ahead and make a copy instead of an image. And that is drastically different, right? So if there's any issues like that, just let me know. We'll figure it out as we go along. And it's easier to deal with right then, that day or the day after, than 9 months from now. And then wrapping up in 30 seconds here, clueless is no excuse, so you can't say, Ryan, I didn't know, or I didn't realize, or whatever. Just let's talk it out, talk it through. The courts don't care if we don't know. We got to figure it out. And then lastly, what's the worst that can happen? The university can get a judgment against us. If we fail to preserve, the judge can say, university, you lose the case, just because we failed to preserve something that they thought was highly relevant to the case. They could also give, they could rule against us on a motion that's critical to the case. They can tell the jury, hey, jury, you think about it what you will. Was this the smoking gun? Was it not? I don't know. You figure it out, jury. And then also they can monetarily sanction the university, thousands of dollars, any amount. They could say, you didn't do what you're supposed to do. You spoliated evidence and data, and that's your punishment. Or it could be all those things. So I'm going to skip that. Once I get final resolution of the case will, if it's dismissed, settled, the appeals process, the whole deal, then I'll let you guys know. You guys will receive a formal letter. So if you don't hear from me, just ask. Don't get rid of anything. It's not until I say this has been released and we can resume our normal business practices. And at the end of the day, it's a group effort. Follow the process. Take reasonable steps. That's what it's really about. Follow the process and do what's reasonable. It's not just meant to be for every little thing that could possibly go wrong. It's just reasonable effort. And then here's some links on where you can, you guys all know the electronic communications policy, but for our preservation practices, that's the link there. And my apologies for going over, I think, by 2 minutes. Any questions? Any questions on the web? Yeah.
Question. We have a set of users who like to keep their stuff indefinitely. Like they have mailboxes going back 10, 11 years. And like, well, I might need it someday.
Right.
You know, and I try to push back like, well, if you keep it, you will need it someday when there's a discovery.
Right.
If you don't keep it and you routinely delete it, you know,
right,
you're probably actually in better shape. Is there like kind of more user-focused guidance, you know, to help kind of bring these policies to our management that's not as technical?
So the question is, you know, some users like to keep their data 10, 15 years. They never like to get rid of anything. Are there any policies, procedures, recommendations on how we can get that data down? It's a weird answer because the answer does not reside in my department. The answer actually resides with the UC retention schedule, right? And so that's a UC-wide policy that says, for example, let me make it simple. If you have an HR file needs to be kept, I think, 7 to 10 years, say, after the person leaves the university, right? Or their payroll records, things like that. So this retention schedule is online. I can email you the link, and it'll kind of give recommended terms, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And then also there's the idea of keeping your data down, and that's where you would probably want to work with campus council, maybe records management, to kind of formulate that plan. And it's really based on the department needs and the business needs. Whatever it is, just follow through with it. And I know today it's a question that comes up all the time. Harold.
My specific, like if you work with Ryan, you get these emails and 90 days reminders. So we've been, creating these folders for 90 days, and then we get another one for 90 days. So are we supposed to create a folder every time we get those for every 90 days, and then we just mark it as whatever, January 1, and then in 90 days we get another one saying reserved for 90 days, and then we just create another folder date called March 30th, or whatever the next 90 days was, right? And then we just keep appending.
So what's in those folders?
Whatever people have been putting in.
Okay. So the question is that when I send the 90-day reminders, is a folder supposed to be created for each 90 days? And the answer would be no. So there should be one central repository for the data. Some users will add to the data, but you can do snapshots and
That's what I mean.
backups. That's what we're
That's
talking
what I'm asking, not for the
okay.
user.
So on your back end.
Yeah, sorry, that wasn't clear. So
okay.
the user has a folder called preservation, whatever, right? And then every 90 days, and I thought first it was just 90 days and that was it, but obviously it takes a little longer than more than 90 days.
Right.
So for local IP, are we supposed to make a snapshot of that next time and place for 90 days, and then in the next 90 days we get another notice because the case is still going on.
Right.
And then we make another snapshot of that folder and then label it with the date. You know what I mean?
That's correct.
That's what we're supposed to do.
So the question is, you making snapshots every 90 days to back up the contents of the local folders, or if you're hosting the email folders on your server? And the answer would be yes. If you want to do it at 90-day intervals, that's perfectly fine. If you want to do it at monthly intervals, whatever that interval is that makes sense for you, then that's what you should do.
Be at least 90.
Yeah. So no, it does not have to be. I send the reminders every 90 days. So the courts say, hey, Ryan, hey, university, it's not sufficient to just send a preservation letter and leave it out in the ether and never follow up and never remind anyone. That's why I kind of chose 90 days. I thought 6 months was too far out. A lot of the departments will then do their backup scope every 90 days. Some will do it every month. If you want to do it sooner, you're welcome to. If you want to keep it on the 90-day schedule, that's perfectly acceptable. 6 months would be too far, because too much can,
So if the case ever ends, will you ever send a notice?
Correct. So the question is, if the case ends, will I ever send a notice that it's over? And I know I kind of went through that slide quickly, but yes, you will get a one-page letter that says, the letter I sent to you on X date, so February 7th, 2009, the case has been settled, the case has been dismissed, or the statute of limitations has expired.
We can or we must get rid of it.
Fine? You want me to?
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so I'm just going to finish up this question. What was the question again?
After we get the letter from you, what should we do with it? Do we have to keep it? I mean, do we have to get rid of it, or can we keep it?
So the question is, if you get the release letter, what do you do with the data that you've been preserving? So it's really on a department basis. You can consult the UC retention schedule. If the person's no longer here and there's no other pending cases associated with that person in consultation with the department management, you probably just get rid of that data. Get rid of that account fully and finally, so that way we don't have to deal with that account in a year from now when we have another case. Other people, maybe there's ongoing issues where they need to keep that, or maybe it's HR issues why they need to keep that data. So actually the release letter will be vague. It'll say, we can now keep your records in accordance with UC's retention schedule. And it's really because each of the records differ. So I can't say, okay, you can destroy it now. But that's what you'll be told. And just kind of discuss it with them. We'll figure it out because it's case-by-case basis.